In this program, I'm going to tell you about some new scientific results that give us a much better way for collecting slugs in the garden. Most of you are familiar with a number of the DIY slug traps, but quite honestly, most of them don't work. If you want to read more about some of those, you'll find them all on my blog, gardenmist.com. The one that does work to some extent is the beer trap. We put beer in a trap, put it in the garden, and in the morning, there are dead slugs in there. Dr. McDonald from Oregon University Extension Office decided to do some testing. So he went through and tested all kinds of things that apparently attract slugs. He tested beer, cucumber, lettuce, tomatoes, strawberries. He even tested hostas. Now we all know hostas attract slugs. But out of all those things, what he found worked the best was bread dough. And it turns out that as a hobby, he's actually a baker, so he was familiar with bread dough. It worked better than all those things, including beer. Now, the problem with bread dough is that if you make up some really nice dough and you put it in your garden, it will get covered with slugs and snails. But all they do is get a feast, and then they leave with fat bellies. All that does is make more slugs and snails. So how do we use bread dough to actually trap and kill them? That's what I'm going to have a look at right now. It's important to understand that there's a difference between having an attractant and having some sort of control mechanism. The bread dough is the attractant, and we're still not quite sure why they like the bread dough, but it has something to do with the fermentation process. That's also why they like the beer. Slugs actually don't like the alcohol, and they don't really care for the beer, but there's something in the fermentation product that they do like. And research is now looking at that to try and figure out which component of that fermentation is actually attracting them. So the bread dough is the attractant. Now we have to figure out some way to actually control them or kill them. Now, one option is that you could make this bread dough and put in some liquid metaldehyde. We know that that's a toxin and kills slugs. So now they would come and eat the bread dough, they'd leave, and then they'd die. I'm sure that works, but most gardeners don't have access to liquid metaldehyde, and we don't really want to go out and get more chemicals for our garden. There is another option that you could use. If we go back to the beer trap, the beer trap works because the slugs come in, they go down and get a drink, and some of them fall in and drown. Well, we can do the same thing with bread dough. So this is how you do it. Get yourself some sort of container. This could be any kind of plastic container, like a yogurt dish works really well. It could be an open dish like a tuna tin. But if at all possible, get one with a lid, because we want to keep rain out. What I'm going to use here is an ice cream tub. I just happen to have these, and I eat more ice cream than yogurt, so these are always around. And if I can collect slugs with these, I just have a good excuse for buying more ice cream. Take the dish, measure up about 1 inch from the bottom, and make some holes. I made some holes with an electric soldering iron because I have that handy. I make holes in the bottom of plastic dishes all the time. But you can use scissors or anything else that pokes a hole. Now, slugs are pretty good at getting into small holes, so you don't need a big hole. Now, with the soldering iron, the hole's a little small, so then I used a little piece of metal I had to force it in and make that hole bigger. So now I have holes that are about 1/4 inch in diameter. That's lots for collecting your large slugs. Next thing you have to do is you have to make some bread dough. And the recipe is pretty simple. 1 cup of flour, 2 cups of water, and 1 pack of yeast. Any dry yeast will work. Now this recipe will actually make dough, and that's a bit too thick. What we want to do is make a bread dough slurry. So this is a runny kind of bread dough. So it will still ferment, it will still make the gases that attract the slugs, but now it's a liquid. And when slugs crawl into the container, they're going to drown. The amount of water you put in isn't that critical. Get something that's fairly liquidy, but not too thin. Now what I decided to do is make up a batch of this. So I made up a larger amount than I really needed. and the flour and yeast were mixed together, but I didn't put in any water yet. And if you do this, you can now store this and you have it ready whenever you need it. Rather than mixing it every time you want to fill a trap, I just add some water in the trap, put in some of this solid material, mix it up, and I'm ready to go. Simply put some water in the bottom of your trap, pour in the mixture of flour and yeast, stir it around, put on the lid, and your trap is ready to put in the garden. So I made up one of these traps, and here's what I had after a couple days. I've caught quite a few slugs, and they're all dead. And I also noticed that there are quite a few earwigs in here. The scientific study didn't mention earwigs, but it seems to attract them too. Now, I don't know if they're after the bread dough or they're after the dead rotting slugs, but in any event, we collected a few of those too. That's a bonus. Now, this mixture is ready to use right away, but it becomes more effective after about 12 hours. You want that yeast to start growing and to ferment the flour. So it's really active after 12 hours, and it's good for several days. At some point, the yeast starts dying off because it's running out of food, and it's time to empty the trap. Now, if you're putting this trap in an area with a lot of slugs, you may have to go in and empty it every couple days because it will just be full. My garden doesn't really have a lot of slugs, so I didn't collect that many. The other thing you should know is that bread dough is toxic to pets, so keep your cats and dogs away from the bread dough. That's another good reason why you want to put it in a container with a lid on it. Kind of protects it from the larger animals. Small holes still allow the small things to crawl in. So how effective is this trap? Are you going to bring in the slugs from the whole neighborhood? Well, it turns out that the way slugs find this bread dough is with their nose, their sense of smell. I don't know if they have a nose, but they do have a sense of smell. And in fact, you can see them. They'll get up on their hind foot and wiggle their antennas, and that's how they smell. The ability to smell only works for about a meter. So this trap will only bring in slugs that are within 3 feet from the trap. So you don't have to worry about bringing in the slugs from your neighborhood. What it also means is that you'll need to place these around at various parts in the garden. You can't put 2 of these in a backyard and expect to catch all the slugs. Remember, it's only good for a distance of about 3 feet from the trap. So think of a 3-foot circle around the trap. That's where the slugs are going to be collected. So you're going to have to put a number of these traps in your garden. Or put them underneath your prized plants. That way you'll protect those plants in particular. So there you have it. Forget about everything you read on social media about collecting slugs. This is the latest science, and they've done quite a bit of work to determine that bread dough is the best way to attract slugs. Forget all those other things. Now, if you'd like to learn more about controlling pests in your garden, have a look at these videos here. Happy gardening.